An elderly woman in an old woolen coat walked down the deserted evening street, struggling to move her legs from exhaustion. Strands of her light brown hair, prematurely silvered with gray, had escaped from beneath a beret that had long gone out of fashion. A heavy bag, as old and worn as her entire appearance, habitually shifted from one hand to the other. The kids near the entrance of a new 5-story building whispered and giggled, eyeing her from head to toe. Every evening she passed by this house on her way to her old hut at the end of the street, the last remaining one after the demolition of the private sector. All her neighbors had been relocated to new apartments. High-rise buildings had been erected in place of their homes, but her house on the outskirts remained alone, unwanted by anyone. She walked slowly, without lifting her gaze, as people murmured behind her back. A beggar. How could she let herself go like this? At least she could get a new coat. She walks around in rags, but she must be working somewhere. Probably spends it all on drinks. That is why she saves on clothes. She cleans entrances in neighboring buildings, in the morning for 3 hours, and again in the evening, managing to clean several buildings. So what, do they pay so little for that? She could have changed her wardrobe by now. It is disgusting to look at her, such a tramp. That coat is from Soviet times. Maybe it's a keepsake. Yeah. Keepsakes usually hang in a closet. The women hissed every time, piercing her hunched shoulders with contemptuous glances. The younger kids dreamed of getting closer to this woman's house, but it was behind a high, albeit old fence, and all their attempts to find even the smallest gap to peek through were futile. The little ones believed she was Baba Yaga and were sure that behind her fence something extraordinary and eerily magical awaited them. The teenagers giggled, looking at her as if she were a museum exhibit from the past. Everyone had their own theories about her. Her perpetually sullen, exhausted look, her old-fashioned tattered clothes, her weary gait, and the mystery behind the fence raised many questions, but each person had their own answers. The woman often heard the taunts and speculations about her, but they did not affect her in the least. Why do you all keep running around that beggar's fence? Don't you have anything better to do? We're curious about who she is, answered the liveliest of the boys. We think she is Baba Yaga, a little girl whispered mysteriously. And behind her fence is a magical house and... Cat. What a bunch of dreamers, a boy interrupted her. If you are so curious, why do not you follow her? Play Sherlock Holmes, suggested one of the older boys, and the rest laughed in agreement. The boys exchanged glances. They liked the idea, and the next day they lay in wait, hoping to catch a glimpse into her yard when she opened the gate. But they saw nothing worthwhile. They followed her to a nearby block, hiding behind a corner, but it was boring and uninteresting. The woman went down into a basement and came out with a bucket of water and a mop. She entered an entrance, and half an hour later, she came out, poured the water into a flower bed, threw away a bag of trash, and then went back into the basement for another bucket of fresh water before heading into another entrance. The boys returned to their courtyard, disappointed and tired. Well, Sherlock's, the older boys teased. Did you learn anything interesting? She washes floors and entrances, one of them grumbled. Well, that is something. Baba Yaga would not mop floors, a boy smirked. At noon, the woman left her house again, and the boys followed, ducking behind trees and corners, peeking out and catching up with her. This time, they had to ride the trolley bus without a ticket, making it harder to stay hidden. It even seemed like she noticed them, but pretended not to. When the strange woman entered the doors of a clinical hospital, the boys hesitated to follow, but overcoming their fear, they rushed after her. By the time they reached the lobby, she had already disappeared behind the closing elevator doors. All they learned was that she had gone up to the 5th floor. They followed, but were not allowed past a small corridor. She's probably cleaning here too, one of them muttered in disappointment. Let us go home, I am hungry. Look, exclamation, another boy whispered, pointing at a slightly open door. The woman emerged from a ward, a robe draped over her shoulders, carrying a bedpan. She headed down the corridor. Worse, sighed another, she is not cleaning, she is emptying bedpans. The boys lowered their heads and went home, muttering in disappointment. One day, idling in the yard, they were drawn to her fence again. They saw a well-dressed man leave her gate and head towards the trolley bus stop. The boys ran after him. He sat on a bench waiting for transport, and two boys sat beside him, eyeing him curiously. The trolley bus arrived quickly and the man left. The boys hurried back to the yard to tell everyone about the miracle they had seen. A few days later, the stranger appeared again. He walked towards the old house, and the kids whispered amongst themselves. As he passed their entrance, a little girl asked loudly, "Mister, are you going to Baba Yaga's house? Aren't you scared?" "What?" the man chuckled, squatting down beside her. "What are you talking about? You are going to that house?" She pointed toward the woman's house. "Does Baba Yaga live there?" The man laughed, and the children gathered around, eagerly awaiting his answer. Seeing their curiosity, he sat on the bench and, looking at them kindly, began to speak. "Yes, I am going to that old house, but very good people live there." People ? An older boy blurted out, "Only that beggar lives there." The man smiled and frowned. "You just called a woman a beggar without knowing how rich she really is." Two women joined the crowd, and others, who had been watching from windows, began to step outside. Everyone looked at the man with great surprise. "Does she have a treasure hidden?" one of the bolder boys asked. "Yes, she has a great treasure in her soul," the man replied with a sigh. Then, realizing he would not be let go easily, he continued his story. "My name is James. I have known this woman, Sarah, since childhood. I used to live here, too." As James spoke of Sarah's sacrifices, her husband's accident, and her relentless care for her family, the crowd listened in stunned silence. When he finished, he left for her house, and the people stood looking at the ground, unable to speak. From that day on, no one called her a beggar. Instead, they greeted her with warmth, calling her simply Sarah. A few months later, Sarah invited everyone to a celebration. Her son had returned home on his own 2 feet. She set a feast in her yard, baked pies, and brewed tea in an old samovar, the only heirloom she had kept. The neighbors now, her friends, came with gifts, and at last, they saw her for who she truly was, a woman of immense strength and love.